there were so many people who wanted to make remarks that we cannot accommodate them all. So what we've done is sample a few different friends of Leo's from a few different walks of life. Their associations all fall somewhere, their associations with Leo all fall somewhere in the timeline that you have here. And they're continuing. That timeline does not do justice to the richness of Leo's 90 years so far. And therefore, as a prelude to what the other people will be saying, I'd like to read a little between the lines that may not be apparent, and I think that some of you may not be aware of. You should beware. This is my own interpretation. Leo and family are not responsible for this, for the fallacies and inaccuracies. 1917. Leo was born in Moscow. His family had fled from the Kaiser's armies invading Poland. And Leo was born in 1917 in Moscow. We could not put the exact date because that would have involved deciding whether to use the Julian calendar, which was still in effect, or the Gregorian calendar, the current calendar. And we did not want footnotes in this document. So a reasonable compromise would be to say that he was born between the Kerensky Revolution in the spring of 1917 and the Lenin Bolshevik Revolution in the fall. And I think that's our first perspective on Leo. He was born before the Communist Revolution, outlasted it, and is still going strong. While getting his law degree, Leo had taken a couple economics courses. In 1938, he got his Magister law degree from the University of Warsaw in both, I believe, civil law and canon law. He had taken some economics courses and enjoyed them. So in 1938, after he got his degree, he was off to study at the London School of Economics. And there, the plot thickens. His Polish passport eventually expired, so he couldn't stay in London. He appealed to the British officials for an extension of his visa, unconditioned, on the promise of his getting a renewal of his passport from Poland. The British replied, "We are not in the habit of doing that." That was a simple answer. So what was Leo to do? War was in the air in Europe in 1939, and his instincts told him not to go back to Poland to get a renewal of his passport. So he planned a traipsing around European capitals to Polish consulates to see if he could get a renewal. When he was in Paris, right after his 22nd birthday, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, was announced in the newspapers. And he realized that something serious was about to happen, and he thought the best course would be to go to a neutral country. He headed for Switzerland. The day after he arrived, he read in the morning's newspaper that Hitler's Blitzkrieg and the bombing of the Polish cities had started the day before, on September 1st. In fact, his home in Warsaw was the family home was bracketed by bombs. So, with World War II having started, once again, his mother and father, and now Leo's young brother, headed eastward. His father was arrested by the Russians and sent to the Gulag. The charge was that he was capable of intellectual leadership. Those of us who had the privilege of knowing him know that he was seriously guilty of the charge, and it seems to have been a hereditary condition. His mother and brother, incidentally, were sent to a different slave camp in Siberia. 1940, it says, came to United States. Simple to say, but it almost did not happen. Leo was in Geneva. Relatives in Chicago sent money for a ticket to the U.S., but the U.S. would not give him a visa unless he had certificates of good conduct over the last 5 years from all the countries in which he had visited in the last 5 years. The French obliged very willingly. The British response was, we are not in the habit of issuing good conduct certificates. Mere mortals would have despaired. But Leo, the consummate Polish logician, suggested to the Geneva police that they wire Scotland Yard saying that Leo was under suspicion, and did Scotland Yard have any dirt on Leo? Scotland Yard, of course, replied, no, they didn't. That satisfied the U.S. officials, who apparently were still working with Aristotelian two-valued logic, and he got his visa. There was no possibility of air travel to the U.S. from Geneva, but he learned that he could get a ticket on an Italian ship from Lisbon. So he traveled again, Geneva to Barcelona to Lisbon. But by the time he arrived in Lisbon, Italy had entered the war on the German side, so Italian ships could not come to the U.S. And he had spent all his money on the ticket. Leo asked, of course, for his ticket money back, and they laughed at him and said he could get it back after the war. A little more Polish logic that I won't go into. This time it was applied to the chief of the harbor police, got him his money back, another ticket, and escape on a Greek ship to Hoboken, New Jersey. 1941, we find 23-year-old Leo as research assistant to 25-year-old Paul Samuelson at the very beginning of MIT's economic renaissance. To commemorate tonight's event, Leo, Paul has written the following letter. And this is an extended thing that I'll say as quickly as I can. MIT's Rupert McLaurin asked new arrival Paul Samuelson, who's the world's greatest economist? Ragnar Frisch, I suggested. Okay, let's get him here at MIT. Rupert McLaurin was the president, I think his father had been president of MIT, but he was chair of the economics department, I believe. No, we can't do that. He's a Norwegian patriot sequestered right now in a Nazi concentration camp where he's reduced to studying Darwinian bee genetics. So to speak, therefore, I had to palm off on go-getter McLaurin, 23-year-old Leo Hurwitz, instead of Frisch or Tinbergen, or for that matter, Keynes. Frenetic McLaurin, there's a story behind this story, and the rest of this is the story. Frenetic McLaurin phoned me nightly. One warm evening, he dangled before me what follows. If you come to MIT for your research, you will have at your disposal the Roger Babson grant to study how Newton's second law of action and reaction applies to macroeconomics. Babson, who personally owned only 2 New England colleges, won Andy Warhol's celebrity fame for, now listen to my words, correctly predicting in advance the great Wall Street crash of October 1929. Never mind that Babson made that prediction in 1925 when the Dow Jones Index was about 1/10 of its 1929 peak. The rest is history. I quit my late September Harvard lecturing on Econ 1 abruptly at the mid-hour. Arriving by Mass Avenue streetcar, what I found awaiting me at MIT were both half a secretary and my own telephone. 10 years later, Schumpeter at Harvard still hadn't attained that affluence. While I couldn't fetch Frisch for McLaurin, I still could deliver to him some new star. But who? Oscar Lange, then at Chicago or Berkeley, narrowed down the field for me. He suggested 2 names, Hungarian Tibor Deskotowski, or a young Pole, Leonid Hurwicz, late of Warsaw, Geneva, Barcelona, and Lisbon, always one step ahead of Hitler's mobile tanks. Think of it this way. Suppose Niels Bohr could choose between, say, Heisenberg or Pauli. My die was cast and MIT was the beneficiary. Historians of stochastic intertemporal US time series and Isaac Newton in his dissenting Anglican Valhalla must know how we did early spectral analysis of Fricke's aggregate US output for the time slot 1865 to 1935. When I say we, I do not refer to Leo and Paul only. Instead, I can still see in my mind's eye Leo, whip in one hand, slide rule in the other, marshalling his crew of mostly young, female National Youth Administration galley slave computers. Parallel computer computation thus merits a marble marker at the northwest corner of Mass Avenue and Memorial Drive. Leo began that there. More melodramatic was the new Hurwicz-Samuelson grading system for my first regular statistics course. MIT engineers have always been notorious whiners. They are grade chasers beyond Philadelphia barracks lawyers. One of us, I will point no finger, said, let's add a hard extra credit exam question with the proviso that it can only raise but not lower your grade. Think a minute about that. All hell broke loose when undergraduate Commerce course nerds learned that their exam mark of 115 put them below the median of the class grades. It did not help when Leo explained that this was the famous Chicago grading system. Leo had little to lose. The Babson pittance was already spent. It was my tenure and future lifetime career that dangled on the razor's edge. I'm told that that Samuelson told Leo, you have 10 minutes to explain to them, figure out an answer. Best of all, the Leo MIT year was a fun year. You know you're a has-been when you hear yourself saying, I gave Goethe his first job. Well, damn it, I did give Leo his. The years 1941 on your timeline show Leo at the University of Chicago, first as a research assistant to Oscar Lange in economics, and then as a research associate in meteorology. In 1943, I think it must have been, Leo was visiting in Washington, D.C., investigating statistical systems for long-range weather forecasting. Long range in those days meant 3 days. When he received some upsetting news, his assistant back in meteorology at Chicago had quit. On the phone, he was advised that a young economics undergraduate named Evelyn Jensen had applied for the job, and that she seemed very bright. So Leo hired her sight unseen. What he didn't know was that his previous assistant had told Evelyn that it was a really great job. The only problem with it is the man you have to work for. Evelyn solved the problem within a year by marrying him. Just looking at all the places on your timeline they have lived, it's obvious that Evelyn is more than merely bright. She's adventurous as well. Later, when asked whether she would be taking a job after her children were in school, she replied, "Why should I work for a stupid man when I can give orders to a brilliant man?" Did you really say that, Evelyn? My sources, Evelyn confirms it. And that's the backdrop for the rest of the line. It's obviously been a very productive partnership. And now, to bring us back to economics, I'd like to call on Hugo Sonnenschein for a few further remarks.